Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm humbled, and I'm really, really honored to be here. It's fantastic. It's amazing. Today I want to go on some aspects of the experience of having a positive, a beneficial mental activity and mental experience, sharing with you some of the research that I've been doing mostly on children, and I've been also doing with graduate students, and one graduate student in particular I'll talk about, Faisa Omer, about the benefits that the good things for the soul are also good for the brain. And that's what I want to show you. I want to show you pictures, representations, and images that signify how great mental practice is beneficial and good for us. And so I have some slides, and I hope they can show them. I can also give this talk without the PowerPoint. Okay, great. Can you go to the next one? All right, so to start understanding, now, I'm not going to compare spiritual or things that are at a higher level and cannot be compared with other things like practicing music or other mental activity. I'm just giving you a glimpse of how beautiful and how great can be the other spiritual, beneficial and good practices. And I only use a humble, modest means of science and neuroscience to have a glimpse of that knowledge. The speaker before us said, the light of knowledge is powerful. It guides you and is beneficial for you. And so a glimpse of that can be reached with science. Next slide, please. Now, what do I mean by mental practice, and what is it that actually is interesting in terms of can be studied with the humble and modest means of science? So I would like you to help me interactively show you what I mean by mental practice, okay? So can I ask you to raise your right hand right now? I cannot see you a lot because I have the light, but I think everybody has their right hands. Now, instead of actually raising your right hand, imagine to raise your right hand right now. Good. All right. So, as you can see, this is a picture of the brain from a technique that is called fMRI. It gives pictures of how active is the brain in terms of colors. Bright colors are red and yellow, means that the brain is very active. Now, the actual raising the hand is very similar to imagining to raising the hand in the brain in terms of activation. The brain is less activated, about 30% less. Nevertheless, the pattern of activation, or when you are thinking of doing something, but you are not actually doing it, and when you are practicing to think, like, swing the golf, or, kick the ball, or throw the ball, well, when you imagine to do all those activities, the areas of the brain that actually do the activity, that actually throw the ball, are activated in similar, very, very similar ways. Now, please, the next. Now, and what I've been starting asking is, okay, we know mental practice, but how about the mental practice that is positive? The things that you feel are good for you, like music, learning languages, drawing and making art. What is it that is good physically for the brain and for the mind, And can we have a glimpse of that effect on us by looking at evidence in the brain? Now, the fact that it's positive doesn't mean that it's without effort, okay? Let's think about when you work out. You go to the gym or you run. Well, it's a positive effect, but doesn't mean that you don't have an effort. You don't have to put work in it. And actually, the more work you put, the more benefit it is sometimes. Now, a related concept is that when the brain does that physical activity and effort, usually there are changes in the brain that are called neuroplastic or neuroplasticity that take in effect in all the brain and change the structure and the chemistry and the physiology and how the brain talks in the different parts within the brain. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, the first example of a positive activity is what I called haptic drawing. Haptic drawing is tactile drawing that uses movement and sensory tactile feedback, or tactile. And you can do this by closing your eyes and simply looking at something that has a relief and has an edge. And that works like a visual picture. Now, one thing that started really bugging me is that children that were born blind, and this was done in Italy, when I was in Italy, they were discouraged from doing any activity that had to do with images or pictures. But they liked it. And that actually allowed them to grapple or have concepts during schools like graphs in math or Braille. And so I started doing this observational study in which I observed a group of 12 years old learning to use drawings. They didn't have any vision, totally blind from birth. And here is what they produced in a period of 1 year. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, next. Please? Yes. So at the start, you see that there are lines that they are producing that are very simple. Next slide, please. And then they get more and more complex as they make more mental practice. It's a physical practice, but also mental, because you have to plan the drawing and where to put the pencil and other things. Next, please. Next slide. Right. One of the things that they started doing is they put in the lines things that have meaning, and they actually look like visual drawings that people that have sight produce. So this is a ball that is bouncing. It's the same ball, and it goes far. That is called perspective. So this was one of the first evidence that children had perspective, even if they were blind. Next slide, please. And then, the production of more complex objects that can actually be recognized. Can you go to the next slide, please? A bird. Next, family. Next, other objects. Next, please. Car. Now, I want to point the depiction of light rays in this car. This is a person that has never seen a light. And how is it possible that the light beams are actually depicted? Well, we discovered that through the lamps, this child could actually have an idea of the thermic energy within light, because light is not just what you see, but also what you feel in the skin, because it's also energy. They are wavelengths. Now, next slide, please. And this is also, next, another demonstration of the effect of perspective. So if you measure the stalks and all the length of the flowers, you will see that the ones that appear far away are smaller, the ones closer are larger. And this is the principle of perspective and 3D vision, which is astounding. Now, next. From the point of view of neuroscience, this construction of going from simple mental practice to the complex one is then kind of exemplifies what the brain does in vision, but also in other senses, and in general, with every mental activity. From a lower level, I don't know if you can see it very well, but what this depicts is the fact that as time goes across and time passes, the children invented more and more devices that are complex to describe reality. Now, next, please. And if you look at the brain, what actually happens, the neuroplastic changes that I was mentioning, is that parts of the visual cortex that these children were not using anymore for vision, because they were obviously blind, were used for tactile, haptic, and other motor tasks. So taking over the parts of the visual cortex that is usually, which is the posterior one, which is usually associated with doing tasks that have to do with vision. And if you look at the activity of the brain, so the red spots on your, where you see the figure that is red, you will see that the children that are blind are actually really differing from children that are not blind in doing the haptic task. And most of the areas that are actually activated during that task are areas that are responsible for seeing things, for vision, but now are being used to do the tactile drawing. Next slide, please. Now, another positive thing, and I think many of you know this, learning English, French, or Arabic, what a wonderful thing. Why is that wonderful in terms of neurons and the brain? Well, I studied a small community in Toronto that was learning Italian and English, and what we discovered is that once you start making these changes and you start learning two different languages at the same time, your brain connects patterns, functionally links things, and then brings them at a higher level. And so to depict this, I don't have pictures of the brain, but I have neuropsychological data, means behavior that has a lot to do with the parts of the brain that we use for language. Next slide, please. And what you can see is that if you see on the axis there where the numbers are, the higher the bars, the better the performance. Now, the English reading is better in children that are monolingual, okay, in both languages, Italian and English. But not only that, children that have difficulty, and we call reading disabled, also are better, okay, than monolingual children that have one language in reading. Now, next slide, please. Which is exemplified here. If you see the disabled children from bilingual background outperform the monolingual ones. Next slide, please. Now, another positive thing that happens to the brain is having an experience that is overwhelmingly nice and good. And one of these things is music. And so we wanted to see, through a study of the cognitive capacity of attention, withholding, response, and not being too impulsive, if children that trained in music for a long time would actually have a better self-control in controlling responses to things like tones that have to do with video games and the media that they are exposed right now. It's very simple task, so it's very simplified in that they have a tone where they have to respond and a tone where they don't have to respond, and they have to withhold the response. So, next slide, please. We wanted to see what were the difference in the brain between children that have a lot of training in music and children that don't have that benefit. Next. And we studied children from Orchestra, which is a program that is offered in downtown, and it's offered to all children. It is especially geared to children that come from socioeconomic disadvantaged background, with children that don't have, didn't undergo that program. It's a very intensive program, so the children practice every day for few hours, and they practice very hard instruments like violin, string instruments, things that are very, very hard to learn. Next. And so what we did was we studied this with another technique, which is the EEG, electroencephalogram, and it consists in having electrodes in your head. They are painless, there is no discomfort or anything. But what that happens to give us is information about the electrical activity of the brain, which is like little squiggles that you see in a piece of paper. Now, you can use those squiggles to see how high the activity is, the amplitude, how the signal of the brain responds. And that is a little bit like seeing pictures of colors in the fMRI. And so the higher these activities, or the higher the differences between two different things that you are studying and you are recording with the electroencephalogram, the more is the brain active. And so we looked at the differences in the brain when the children are paying attention and have to, respond, and when children have to pay attention but not respond, and so they have to self-control the movement of the response. Now, this is interesting. Will that music training give them higher abilities in controlling their actions? And how does that show in the brain? Next, please. And as I was telling you, we get the EEGs, so this is continuous activity that is always present, is present right now. But what happens is we break it down and we see it in specific moments, so before the movement is due for the response to the tone, or when they have to withdraw response. And then we see the differences. As you can see, blue and red are the two different conditions, and you see for those gaps. When you see those gaps, it means that there are changes, important changes. We call it significant. Next, please. And you also see behaviorally that the children are more sensitive to some sounds. For example, we looked at their responses, their rapidity in responding to the tones, and the children that are undergoing the training in the music are faster than the other ones. Meaning that there are some changes that are not just higher up in the areas of the brain, but also the level of auditory processing. Next, please. And we also looked at differences, and there were clear differences between the two samples. Can you go next, please? Now, the most astounding results is that when you look at the brain, it's not one part that is affected. Okay? If I look just at the motor action, I will look at a central part of the brain lighting up and giving these differences. Okay, so the blue and the red and the other colors signify how important, how large was the response of the brain. But you can see from this picture that the music was producing changes across the brain. In every electrode that we actually look at, in every area. So it's a global response. And so this is one of the first cues to what the positive effect, that generative, creative effect of positive mental practice could actually give to the brain. Next, please. And to simplify this again, if you look at the circles and you look at the, and you compare them across time, the last rightmost panel, okay, where you have most of the activation and it's global and it's large in the brain, is where the children are giving either response or not. The one in the bottom is when they are controlling the response. And look how large is the response of the entire brain. Next, please. Now, I'm not comparing the memorization of Quran to this, kind of inferior, positive. The Quran is eminently and distinctly unique. The effects of neuroplasticity are unique. But the Quran guides you in understanding also what is it that is beneficial physically and to the brain that brings more and more value to it. Can you play the clip? So to tell you this, the most qualified, it's not me, it's my student. This is her work. I'm not taking credit for her. And I have a clip, a wonderful clip. She went into a competition talking about this and her research, our research. Faisa Omer, I hope she's here. She's wonderful. And I would like to use her clip to actually show her work and the significance of it. Can you play it?
Anfangen eichlich.
Volume.
Wie Herren eine Kunst is a German proverb that directly translates to, starting is easy, persistence is an art. A saying that I'm sure that all grad students in this room can especially relate to. When learning a new foreign language, factors such as tone, pronunciation, and intonation are all required to sound like a native speaker. Though I only spoke 6 words in German, it took me hours to get the pronunciation right, another hour to commit the words to memory, yet I still managed to butcher it. Now imagine if I were to memorize an entire book of German proverbs with the perfect pronunciation and without understanding the language. It'd probably take me months, years even, to reach my goal, right? It seems impossible. But how about if I tell you that there are millions of kids that are doing this right now, right? So Quran memorization is the memorization of the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. It spans around 600 pages, and it is the most memorized book in history. Muslim children start memorizing the Quran as young as 3 years old. The Quran memorization starts with learning how to read and write in Arabic without understanding it. Now, this might seem like an impossible feat, but with the brain as your central hardware, anything is possible. The brain has this magnificent ability to effectively adapt to its environment. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's shapeable qualities. The brain is rewired whenever you extensively practice something. The difference between a professional athlete and a regular athlete are their neural networks. Now let's apply this concept of neuroplasticity to this particular population of children. Committing more than 600 pages of a foreign language to memory would definitely rewire your brain. These children are better at certain skills than others because of these new connections in their brain. For example, one of the students that I met was named Adam. If you flip to any page in this 600-page book and read an excerpt, Adam had the ability to continue reading without a hitch. Wow.
Well, so the question is, what happens? Okay, these are preliminary data. We are not, we are doing a lot of more studies, but we found something, and I want to share it with you. Can you please? Well, this is the task that FISA devised. And so the children had to, when they had the prompt, they had to, basically a multiple choice test where there was a verses of Quran they have memorized, and then there were options given, and then at one point they had to select one of them. Next slide. So if you look at the brain activity, you see huge differences, okay, between when the children have an interference, and so it's harder, and we use it as a probe because that will tell us if there is more difference between the interference or non-interference of a background noise. That means that they are doing more effort, but then also will tell us what are the areas that are most involved and active. And so if you look at the difference between interference and non-interference within the same children, you look at different changes that go across the brain. Wow, I mean, you remain a bit astounded by this complexity of activation, but there is a logic. When you look closer, can you go next? Next slide, please. You start seeing changes that are very important in the right part of the brain, which is usually, and in the frontal central part of the brain, which is usually the one that deals with singing, music, a patterning that has to do something with taking sound in and memorizing it, but also making a melody out of it. Then, next slide, please. You also see the Broca network area of language to speech, to produce speech, but also to do other things with speech and language, okay, in the left part of the brain. Next, please. Then you see also a pattern in the back of the brain, which is due to perception and vision, as I was telling you, that also gets lightened up and is probably related to recognizing the verses and the parts of the verses. Next, please. Then you also see attention in the frontal lobe, but we also see that all this across all the electrodes, okay, is timed perfectly together and correlates. That's called synchronization. So the brain comes together globally, sharing information across various areas in a way that, you know, no other activity shows. So, next. This is my conclusion. So there are different good things that we feel good and are positive and give us benefits. Now, you cannot compare them, okay? I'm not trying to compare one thing with the other. I'm saying they are unique. But there is something there, and some of them that are more eminent and more important and elevate spiritually and physically show us at the higher level and some at the lower level, which is you have this enormous escalation of activity and sharing of information within different parts of the brains that are also far apart at the same time. In modern neuroscience, in the terms of modern neuroscience, this means that you reach higher level of human consciousness. And so spiritual activity and praying and memorizing of Quran is also something that is probably relating to the benefits and the goodness that is in these mental practices. And we learn from the Quran. The Quran was long before neuroscience and is guiding neuroscience, is giving light to our humble, modest ways to find out and knowledge. Thank you so much for your attention.